The only person we've ever claimed was perfect was Jesus Christ. When I read about Joseph Smith losing his temper or Brigham Young or something like that, it's something that I expect to come across because, we're not dealing with a story about perfect people. Weakness is a way that God demonstrates his power, that a person that is flawed can be an instrument in God's hand, and that's something that shows us that God can uplift and help any of it.
I often say hallelujah that God works with imperfect prophets because it means he's willing to work with an imperfect me. Yeah. And thank goodness for that because we all know how imperfect we ourselves are. There is so much information, a lot of misinformation, so much half-truths, quarter truth, less than quarter truth, just being woven out there.
Welcome to the Holy Rebellion. Welcome back to the Holy Rebellion. I'm Christian.
And I'm Travis, and we here have with us our new friend, Casey Griffiths. Casey, thank you so much for being with us.
Good to be here.
Casey, you are you're the host of Church History Matters. You're a professor at BYU.
Yeah, one of the hosts of Church History Matters.
One of the hosts, thank you. You're an author, you do tours, you do so much all in this world of church history. And we were laughing for a moment before the show that you're entrenched in all things controversy.
Yeah, I didn't intend that, but that's just kind of how life turned out. But it's good. I like what I do.
Well, it's beautiful. And today, one of the reasons we wanted to invite you on is because as content creators online, we walk into the fire at times and people throw darts of accusation or different things at us. So we wanted to touch on some of those controversial topics today with you. Is that okay?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, right on. Before we get to some of those, a few easy ones, a few warm-up questions. What was the moment that you realized that you wanted to dedicate your life to being a historian, a church history historian, to be specific?
I wanted to be a seminary teacher in high school.
Okay.
But church history was really, I was on my mission, and there was this institute manual called Church History in the Fullness of Times, which I just found fascinating. And I've had a chance to work with some of the teachers that wrote that book since,
cool.
And I just was like, total fanboy. Hey, where did you find this source and where did you get it? And they just created a really readable, engaging history of the church. And, I love to read the scriptures and I love to read the Book of Mormon, but it was like, as soon as I was done with those, I had that book open. And when we came home for lunch, I had it open, and when I'm in the bathroom and, all those places. And I just sort of fell in love with the characters and personality of church history. Like, it's just, some people might think this is bad, but it's something you're never going to totally get to the bottom of. Yeah. There's just always something new to learn and some new insight to be gained. And I've been studying it for about 30 years now, and I still learn new things on a regular basis or make connections. So it's just a well that has never run dry for me.
That's really interesting. The one thing we always hear online, and often this is from ex-members of the church and anti-members of the church, they'll say, if you only knew this, you wouldn't believe anymore. If you knew more about an insert controversial church history topic, then you wouldn't be able to keep your faith. Has that been your experience?
No. I obviously
He's still here.
And I work for the church, so I have run that thought experiment of, if I didn't work for the church, would I have lost my faith? No. Honestly, it's history, right? And it seems like people that make assertions like that operate from the assumption that everybody in history has to be perfect. And I think any historian will tell you that the more you study it, the more you realize that people are flawed and that they struggle. And once you see that as a plus and not a minus, then history becomes endlessly fascinating. Like, the honest truth is, the only person we've ever claimed was perfect was Jesus Christ. So when I read about Joseph Smith losing his temper or Brigham Young or something like that, it's something that I expect to come across because, we're not dealing with a story about perfect people. And this isn't just church history. Like, there's so many people that become disillusioned with the history of their country or, you name it, just because they don't start with the assumption that we're talking about human beings that make mistakes and are flawed. And when you start operating that way, that Jesus Christ is the fixed point here, and he's the main character, then all the supporting cast having flaws actually makes the story more interesting.
That's a great point. I always wonder that if we had as much documentation on like Peter or Paul as we do Joseph Smith, it's like would we still believe their words?
I mean, and there's still plenty there, right? Like imagine, an anti-Mormon circa AD 36 going, hey, did you know Peter denied Christ three times?
Right.
Or did you know John is a total racist that hates Samaritans and stuff like that?
He ate bugs.
If you were like, oh my gosh, Peter is a terrible person, well, I can't have anything to do with this movement. I mean, come on. Like, again, the records we have about them that long ago are much more fragmentary. Church history, we have a whole mountain of material to draw from, but they're humans just like us. And when you read the scriptures, you start to see that, they were struggling with the same things we do, that the times change, but the issues sort of are the same.
One quick follow-up question there. This isn't necessarily a question that they ask, but they kind of pose this premise is, okay, let's grant that they're flawed human beings. How flawed can a prophet be and still be a prophet? And maybe there's not a great answer for that, but
I mean, I guess what's the limits of God's forgiveness, basically?
That's a good way to frame it.
And how flawed can you be and still call yourself a good person? Like, everybody wrestles with that question every single day. Am I a good person? Am I not a good person? When it comes to others, if we only dwell on their flaws, then maybe we undermine our faith in people around us. But I try and do a healthy balance of saying, hey, this person was flawed, but they also did this amazing thing. And the scriptures teach that weakness is a way that God demonstrates his power, that a person that is flawed can be an instrument in God's hand. And that's something that shows us that God can uplift and help any of us.
Yeah. Yeah, I often say hallelujah that God works with imperfect prophets, because it means he's willing to work with an imperfect me.
Yeah.
And thank goodness for that, because we all know how imperfect we ourselves are.
Yeah. But I mean, all negativity, which is sometimes what happens is a person just focuses on everything that they can find wrong and never looks and uplifts themselves. Like, I remember a friend of mine whose job was to just read anti-Mormon material.
That was his job.
That was his job.
What, did he get paid enough?
I mean, I asked him, like, how do you do that? How do you do that and not, lose your testimony? And he looked at me and said, I just read the Book of Mormon for 30 minutes every day. And he goes, and that restores me enough that I can dive back in. And he said, and actually, as I'm reading that stuff, I'm learning a lot about, like, flaws, but also ways people present information. Like, sometimes two people can take the exact same data set, and one person can come away going, this is inspired, and another person, this is evil, right? And so a lot of it is the perception that you bring to it, and all historians are biased, to be honest with you. So you do have to check yourself, but we also try to maintain kind of a fair or balanced approach towards these things to say, why did they do this? Well, do I understand the context? Do I know what was going on? And also, what did they accomplish? Like, what were they going for? Did it work out the way that it was supposed to? How has this affected me? And is it a positive or a negative ultimately?
Kind of testing the fruits of it.
Yeah, you're testing their fruits.
Yeah, and I love this. It's just so true now that in 2025, there is so much information, a lot of misinformation, so much half-truths, quarter truth, less than quarter truth, just being woven out there. And my question for you, so members of the church nearly every day, if they're on the internet, they're going to come across information that they witness it, it feels icky, it feels wrong, they don't want to touch it, there's a sense of fear associated with it. My question for you is, as a historian, how would you advise us responsibly approaching topics that might make us feel nervous approaching?
I mean, the first thing is to maintain mental flexibility. If something comes up that you haven't heard before, it's a good practice to say, well, what do I know about this, and where can I find out more? It also doesn't hurt to know how good history is written. And so you come across something, and it can be pro or against the church. But you have to maintain objectivity and say, well, what's the source here and how reliable is that? How does it compare to other sources? What's the intent and tone behind it? Why was it written? And as you're asking those questions, it does come into focus, right? For instance, there's a story that's often told that after Joseph Smith was martyred, a man stepped out of the crowd. In some versions of the story, it's the son of Lilburn Boggs, the governor of Missouri. And he went up to decapitate Joseph Smith and was struck by a ray of light that froze him in place, and they had to drag him away. And that is awesome. Like, as a church member, I'm like, that's a great story.
Yeah.
But as a historian, you have to look at it and say, okay, does this fit the facts that we know? First of all, neither John Taylor nor Willard Richards, and Willard Richards actually looked out the window to see if Joseph was still alive, said anything about that happening. Willard Richards said the whole attack on the jail, they ran in, they killed Joseph and Hiram, and they ran away, took place in 2 minutes. So was there enough time for that to happen? Was Lilburn Boggs' son there? What did the court transcript say? There was a murder trial for Joseph Smith. Did this come up in any of it? This story actually did, and was discredited during the murder trial. So even though a great story like that is pro-church, it makes it seem like, God was protecting Joseph Smith's body. As a historian, you have to back up and say, hey, that could be faith-affirming for a little while. But once a person starts to dig into it, it's a false foundation to build on. At the same time, too, you read accounts by John Taylor and Willard Richards, who were both there and saw the martyrdom and wrote their stuff down fairly quickly after the martyrdom occurred. And it does fit the facts. It fits the information that comes out of the court case. That's a foundation that you can build on. So, I mean, honestly, when you come across something that's surprising, yeah, you do have to back up and say, okay, why was this written? Was this written to tear down faith? Was this written to build up faith in an artificial way? And what's real and not real? And honestly, the big skill that we're lacking a lot of times right now is just epistemology, which is how do you know what you know and how do you know what's true? So I start all my courses actually by going through the tools of a historian's trade and basically saying, hey, here's some warning signs that what you're reading might not be accurate. And here are the signs that this is an accurate, responsibly written account. So something like Joseph Smith healed a bunch of people July 9th, 1840. On the banks of the Mississippi River, everybody is sick with malaria. Joseph Smith gets up and starts healing people. One guy, Elijah Fordham, he actually brings back from a comatose state. The guy's almost dead. Joseph Smith grabs his hand and says, in the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to rise and be made whole. The guy jumps up and starts helping Joseph Smith perform blessings. That happened, and on that day, Wilford Woodruff followed Joseph Smith around and made a journal entry that exact day where he described the exact conditions, and the story was corroborated by several other people that were there. So all the facts fit together. We have contemporary evidence. We have firsthand witnesses, and we can look at a story like that and say, yeah, it seems like that's true. Wilford Woodruff in his journal, called Joseph Smith a prophet, but didn't say anything outlandish or make any claims that can't be verified. At the end of the day, Joseph Smith even gave Wilford Woodruff a handkerchief because somebody contacted them and said that there were these 2 infant twins that were sick. Joseph said, Wilford, take this handkerchief and go and put it on the twins' head and they'll be healed. And Wilford Woodruff recorded that happened. The handkerchief is in the Church History Museum. Wow, Wilford Woodruff kept it the rest of his life. So a big part of it is, the internet has created this flood of information, and that's not bad. What's bad is that we're just not good at telling good information from bad information at this point. So every member of the church needs to learn the tools of the trade, especially when it comes to church history, but not just history. When it comes to like reading the news, knowing these things is helpful too, because there's all kinds of outlandish claims made all the time. And not just about the history of the church, but like the current leadership of the church. And being able to step back and say, all right, what's your source there? And who's telling you this stuff? And where's it coming from? Makes a big difference.
I had an experience a few years ago where this is controversial, I stopped watching the news.
Okay.
I just I felt angry all the time.
Yeah.
So I just stopped watching it, and for years, I just didn't watch any, and my life actually got better, but I wanted to know what was going on in the world, so I found this, newsletter. It's supposed to be unbiased. I think it is. They kind of it's a little blurb about here's something that happened, but they don't tell me how to feel about it. And it was really interesting that I would read something and I was like, how should I feel about that? I was waiting for somebody to tell me how to feel about it because I've been fed that my whole life. And so I've had to develop this ability to think for myself on what do I do with this information. I think the same is with church history.
Yeah, I mean, it's called enraged to engage, right?
Enraged to engage.
If you can get a person angry, they will engage more with your content.
We found that works sometimes. And we're not even trying.
I mean, if you guys wanted to get 1 million views, you would just say something that like enrages people and put it on YouTube. With
Joseph was a prophet. Yeah,
we're not making people mad enough. That's our problem.
But I mean, that's part of the problem too. Is as a historian, sometimes you have to dare to be boring and say, hey, this sounds amazing, but here's the sources and here's what we know and what we don't know. And again, once you've learned that, you can start to apply that to the news and be objective and back up and say, okay, there really is something here that's wrong, and that I should be, impelled to action by, but I don't have to get angry all the time. Like that's the problem right now. Is we're so seeking for engagements that we're just trying to make everybody angry all the time and everything. And sometimes there is good reason to be angry, but when your emotions are constantly up here, when something comes along that's genuinely wrong that you should engage with, you're already so exhausted, right? You're just so callous that you just think, there's nothing that can be done about it, or the whole system's corrupt. When in reality, God wants us to engage and he wants us to make a difference. But he wants us to be informed too. There's plenty of sections of the Doctrine and Covenants where the Lord says, seek learning, find the best books. But the key phrase there would be the best books, right? Not all books are created equal. And today, not all websites or content creators created equal. Some are just doing it for the clicks, honestly. Yeah. And I hate to sound cynical, but for the money.
Yeah, no, truly though.
Along those lines, the other thing we often hear, and we've addressed this several times, it'd be interesting to hear you address it, is that the church only wants you to read church materials. In fact, you should not ever read something outside of church-approved materials.
Oh, I mean, what's a church-approved material first?
I don't know, a manual.
The question, like the Joseph Smith Papers is a project that's run by the church, right? They're financing it with the help of some donors, but its aim is to put every document related to Joseph Smith into a digital archive. So is that church-approved material? Because there's stuff there that's not always flattering to Joseph Smith. And, I mean, would the church want you to read someone like Laurel Thatcher Ulrich, who's a Pulitzer Prize-winning historian, but she's a faithful Latter-day Saint? So does that count as church-approved material? Because if she's not publishing it through the church. The other thing is in the last couple of years, the church has become very conscious of charges that they aren't being transparent. So they've gone to great lengths when they post something to put the footnotes there. And honestly, the footnotes are where you should be looking a lot of times. A lot of times with an article like, let's say on the First Vision, the 1832 account of the First Vision is controversial. But you can also click on a link in the article and see the actual 1832 account. I'm not talking like the page it was written on, and then see and judge for yourself. So, I mean, yeah, the church materials are going to have a bias. Every historian has a bias. Anyone that tells you they don't is lying. But they can also be transparent by posting their sources, by explaining their methodology, and by allowing people access to those. And I mean, I like to tell my classes we're living in the golden age of church history, because you don't have to just listen to somebody tell you about, say, the 1832 account. You can go and look at it for yourself. Like, you can see every scratch on the page when Joseph Smith was writing his story, or when he was dictating it to a scribe, and see how the process actually worked. So, I mean, I think the church has been fairly transparent. But I would also say, if you want to read stuff that isn't published by the church, that's not church approved, also make sure that they're like responsible. Like, are they good historians? And what's the methodology that they use? Because again, some people tell salacious stories so that they can draw others in, and some people are willing to post their sources. Some people are willing to explain their methodology. Some people go to great lengths to explain, here's why I came to this conclusion. And if they're willing to do that work, then yeah, I think they're worthy to be listened to. Not everything I read is approved by the church, not by a long shot. But I'd also like to think that I have the tools to say, this is good history and this is bad history. And some pro-church history is bad history, sorry to say.
Right.
It can be just as dangerous as anti-Mormon stuff.
Yeah,
it's not done well.
Some of the folklore that gets passed around.
Yeah. And somebody locks into that and builds their testimony on it, when they find out that it's not responsibly written, it can be really damaging to a person. It can harm their trust.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to bring it home for just a minute, make it personal. This is actually a question that my wife and I were pondering recently. We've heard the quote that the problem isn't that you know church history, the problem is that you don't know enough. So if we as Latter-day Saints believe that, which has actually been my experience as we've gotten into this work of apologetics, and I've read more and studied more than at any other point in my life about the history of the church and about some of these controversial topics, it has actually given my testimony more of a structure to be built on. And my question for you is, for you personally, how do you apply this to your family, to your kids? How do you introduce your children to difficult topics, and when? Like, how old? Like, what's appropriate? What's your thought?
I mean, we read the scriptures together every night. And I think if you do that, you come across all those topics. Like, honestly, it amazes me when people are like, I didn't know Joseph Smith practiced polygamy. Well, Section 132 in the Doctrine and Covenants. The church asked us to read Section 132 this year. And so, I mean, at the time of this recording, Section 132 was about a week ago. Mm-hmm. And we read through the entire section, including the really difficult parts that talk about the introduction of plural marriage and the law of Sarah and the conflict between Joseph and Emma. And we just talked about it. And we didn't talk about it in a way like, oh, we're trying to shield you or anything here. We just had an open, frank conversation about why plural marriage was introduced, and that it was natural that Emma struggled with it. Joseph said he struggled with it too, and we had a conversation with them. So I haven't tried to shield them from anything. At the same time, I try to do exactly what I'm describing here. Just teach them how to know truth when you find it, and then teach them that the world is more complicated than you want it to be. So we talk about like what it's like when real people encounter really difficult issues. And next year when we study the Old Testament, when we get to Joshua, we're going to have a difficult conversation about genocide. We're going to have a difficult conversation about Abraham and Isaac and why the Lord would ask such an extreme test of one of his disciples. When we get to David and Bathsheba, we're going to have a conversation about lust and pornography and adultery and all that stuff. Because, I mean, the thing that seems to set apart the scriptures is we have these stories that we use to guide our lives, right? Like Star Trek has been really influential in creating my moral compass.
Yeah.
But Star Trek is not real. The scriptures tell the story of real people, and real people are messy, and anciently and in modern times. I mean, what do you do when you get to the story where God's sending an angel to kill Moses because he hasn't circumcised his son and Zipporah has to do it for him? We're just going to talk about that, right? And the thing that I tell my kids is that I like the scriptures because they are messy, They're not a nice little Star Trek episode where everything is wrapped up in 42 minutes with time for commercials. Yeah. And everybody's always upright and moral and perfect and everything like that. The scriptures are about real people, and real people lead messy lives, but that's what makes them so authentic. That's why stuff like the Bible has lasted for thousands of years, is it doesn't pull its punches when it comes to violence and immorality and the things that real people struggle with and the conditions that we exist here on earth in.
Whoa. So you're saying it's just as simple as study your scriptures with your family?
Sorry, that was a really complicated way to say read your scriptures and say your prayers. But I mean, you also grow, like, I remember reading the scriptures when you were a kid. Yeah. And, you read that passage where Corey Antwer chops off Shiz's head, and you were like, that's awesome. It's one of my
favorite stories,
yeah. And then when you become an adult, you're like, whoa, violence takes a toll on people. And you start to see, I've been fortunate to not experience a ton of violence in my life, but, people that I love, people that were in the armed forces, and you read the scriptures again, and you realize, oh, they didn't put that in there to give like a triumphant end to the book of Ether. Even that passage where it says that he rested on his sword a little before he takes the action conveys so much about how much it hollows a person out to have to engage in violence and how dangerous it is. And you know what? Maybe my kids are reading it on that level, like it's awesome he chopped off his head and his body moved. But as an adult, I read it and say what they were trying to convey here was how violence just fundamentally kills a person's soul. And that's the message that I'm supposed to take away, so that when I have a choice between thinking a violent thought or taking a violent act, I back up and say, this is never a good thing. Sometimes it's a necessary thing, but is there any possible way we can avoid it? And so, the scriptures are real, and they teach real principles that do make us better people. That's all I do with my kids. Nothing complicated. I've taken them to all the church history sites too. But I mean, when we go to Nauvoo, when we go to the red brick store, it's not just, hey, the Relief Society was organized here. I'm like, they did the first endowments here, and they performed eternal marriages, and some of them were plural marriages, and they also performed Masonic ceremonies here. Like, I just tell them the whole thing. And I mean, I hope my kids are okay. It seems like they're doing great. But I've always told them, I was trying to be honest with you about our history. I'm not trying to sugarcoat it.
I find that there are members of the church, and I would say maybe this is the minority, but there are members of the church who take the exact opposite strategy, where it's, if there's anything that I don't understand that causes me fear or anxiety, or that might threaten my faith, I don't care. It's out there. I don't care. I'm going to ignore it.
And I think that's normal, right? It's just, it seems like in the long run, it's sort of a self-defeating strategy. Like, it's something that's easy to do right away because you avoid any pain or any discomfort. But ultimately, these things are really happened. And like I said, they were real people. And we're kind of shielding ourselves from what the real world is like if we ignore them. So, I mean, I'm okay with the person saying, that's enough for today. There are times when I have to turn off my iPad and say, that's enough internet for today. I need time to sit back and process and become in the real world. And you can go down rabbit holes in a way that does sort of start to rot your brain, right? At the same time, too, when you come across something that's uncomfortable, it's worthwhile to do the work and say, well, how should I feel about this? And do I know enough about this? And like I said, also back up and say, is this uncomfortable because it's real, or is it uncomfortable because the way it was written? Like, what's the perspective? What's the intent and tone of this particular thing? And the person that's telling me the story, where are they coming from? What's their motive? What do they believe? And everything like that.
Yeah, I think you're right. It is a self-defeating strategy long term. And the people I see who live that way, they grow up and have kids, and their kids don't live that way.
Yeah.
And so they'll have questions that their parents, like, they get on TikTok for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, I didn't know any of this. And I think that there may have, like, the parent could have potentially done a better job of preparing their children for.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a story from time immemorial, right?
Yeah.
That parents try to protect their kids, and they do so out of good and righteous impulses. And I'm not saying I take my 7-year-old to Mountain Meadows. I actually have.
He is that guy.
I have taken my 7-year-old to Mountain Meadows and said, something bad happened here. But, I don't go into all the gory details or anything. Yeah. I just tell her.
Age appropriate.
Yeah, I tell her, hey, sweetheart, bad things happen in this world, and a very bad thing happened here. And what it shows is that even good people can have fear and hysteria get to them. And that's why I want you to be really cautious whenever you're thinking a violent thought or thinking that violence is the right way to solve a problem. So, I mean, it's here to be instructive. And I think we can take the same kind of unflinching approach that the people that wrote the scriptures did, where they're saying, we're not going to wallow in the muck, but we're not going to pretend like it's not there either, because we live in a world that's deeply troubled. Like, that's point A of the gospel of Jesus Christ. All have sinned and come short of the glory of God. But we can make a difference. But we can't make a difference until we know how bad the problem is. And once we understand how bad the problem is, then we get out there and we day to day try to make things better. And I tell my kids, like, there's no magic solutions to the world's problems, but there are solutions. It's just I can't snap my fingers and make this stuff go away. You have to get in the fight, roll up your sleeves, and every day, get out of bed and go out and do a little bit more to push back the darkness. And if we all do that, then it makes a big difference.
Well, Casey, what a treat so far, and we're just getting ready to jump into some of the good stuff. Okay. So thank you. Such a fun introduction to how to approach topics like this. And I love what you taught us about how to approach it with our families. It's small and it's simple, but it's authentic and it's direct. And so I love learning that from you. Christian and I, our experience as we've gotten into some of this content creation is that regardless of whatever our video topic is about, and we respond to a lot of people who are criticizing the church, people will jump into the comment section and essentially, Christian, you can help me out here, but
we call these hit and runs. We get a lot of hit and runs.
Yeah, they're not that interested in engaging in the content itself. They just want to throw their jab in and disappear.
Yeah.
And it's, okay, well, Joseph was a Freemason, which in their eyes discredits him immediately. Another would be the priesthood ban, that you Mormons are just a bunch of racists. Discredited. And perhaps polygamy, plural marriage might be.
And some derivatives of that.
Yeah.
We're going to save the conversation of plural marriage for a different conversation, but we're hoping that you could walk through with us a little bit on the conversation of Freemasonry, how it relates to the temple, and the priesthood ban with us today.
Yeah, okay. So what do you want to do first?
Let's first start with how we are members of the Illuminati.
Let's just get it out.
Let's get right to it.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, Freemasonry is one of those. Freemasonry and race in the priesthood are two things where the context is really valuable. Where Freemasonry was this institution, it still exists in the United States. Once you start to, identify Freemason symbols, you can see them all over the place, right? Like you'll go to a town and, there's the Freemason temple. I just did never notice that it was there. Or this clock has a compass and a square on it. Those are Freemason symbols, and the G that they put everywhere. The Shriners are Freemasons, like those guys that wear the weird fezzes and drive they're Freemasons. Yeah. So it's existed for a really long time. It's a huge part of the American story. But just not a lot of people have appreciated it. Like most people's knowledge of Freemasonry comes almost entirely from like internet memes. if they've heard anything positive, it's that they watched National Treasure with Nicolas Cage.
There it is.
Which talks about how the Freemasons kept this treasure. And, anyway, I mean, if you're looking at American history, almost all the founding fathers were Freemasons. George Washington was a Freemason. If you go to the Masonic Temple in Philadelphia, you walk in and they have, a huge hall that has stained glass windows of famous Freemasons, and the first one's George Washington, and the next one's Andrew Jackson, and then Teddy Roosevelt, and then Harry Truman. All Masons. We haven't had a president that was a Mason since Gerald Ford. So Masonry has kind of waned significantly in its influence. But I mean, in the 19th century, at one point, I think something like 1 in 5 men were Freemasons.
Wow.
And it was seen as an upright institution that their log line today is still, we make good men better. But it was this institution that basically, first of all, they did commit to live moral lives. They did perform secret ceremonies and things like that. But when you start to watch TV, you'll see something like on the Flintstones, they're part of this lot. It's a Freemason thing. It's all over the place, honestly. And Freemasonry did have its share of troublemakers. They had some people that took the ideas of Freemasonry too far. But it was so ubiquitous. Like if you go to Palmyra today, there's a Freemason lodge right on Main Street. And there was back when Joseph Smith was there. Like I said, most of the founding fathers were Freemasons. And what it did essentially was it was this male fraternity that allowed people to kind of make connections and help each other out. Like Masons do covenant to help one another. It's kind of like a church in that sense. It's not a church in the sense that they don't really have any ecclesiastical rights or claim any salvational things that they do. A person just has to believe in a higher power. They don't have to be part of any specific denomination. So it was kind of a space where people from a lot of different backgrounds could come together and connect. So if you're a Presbyterian or you're a Methodist who typically hate each other, you could both be Freemasons and still be brothers. And on the American frontier, a lot of times it was a good way to connect. So here's what we know for sure. A lot of early members of the church were Freemasons. Some people were anti-Masons. Like, some people thought that the Freemasons had too much influence and that they were like the Illuminati. And I know saying all the founding fathers makes it sound like they are the Illuminati. But it's just a lot of men of influence were Freemasons. So, for instance, Hiram Smith was a Freemason. Heber C. Kimball was a Freemason. Noel K. Whitney was a Freemason. Others like W.W. Phelps actually ran an anti-Mason newspaper. All these people joined the church, and for the most part, they sort of set Masonry aside, whether they were for or against it. Their new cause was the gospel of Jesus Christ and the restored church. But the church goes through a lot of ups and downs, and especially after Hans Mill and what happened in Missouri with the extermination order, they get to Nauvoo and they realize, boy, like, we keep getting beat up. Is there any way we can avoid this? And in Nauvoo, one of the things that they decided to attempt was to be more open, to connect with other people. Like, their feeling was, maybe we're too insular, and that's the problem. That's why people keep persecuting us. And so they do a couple things in Nauvoo. First of all, if you read through section 124, which is the revelation that sets up Nauvoo, they're commanded to build two things: a temple, which isn't surprising, and a house for strangers, the Nauvoo house. So they're supposed to build this boarding house, which is sort of like the church's first visitor center. And it's just for anybody that they can come to Nauvoo and stay with us and see that we're not bad people. And it's during this sort of spirit of inclusiveness that they decide, well, what if we invite a Masonic lodge to be set up in Nauvoo? And this happens, with enthusiastic approval from all the people that are former Freemasons. Joseph Smith's dad was probably a former Freemason. We don't have great records on that, but they invite the Masons to set up a fraternity in Nauvoo. And members of the church are like-minded. They're joiners. Almost all of them join Freemasonry as well. Joseph Smith does also. And so it seems like it was an attempt for them to, create networks that would allow them to have friends that when there was trouble or when there were misunderstandings, they could call on their friends to help them. And it's not much more complicated than that, to be honest with you.
Do we know how eager or reluctant were the Masons to bring a lodge to Nauvoo?
Seemed like they were really eager. In fact, Illinois, the whole state, initially was very welcoming to Latter-day Saints. They give Nauvoo a really generous charter where it's pretty much an independent polity. The Masons saw this as a big population that they could kind of cater to, and that they were seeing this as mutually advantageous. The problem is that I think the numbers are that there were something like 300 Freemasons in Illinois total. But in the church, almost every male joined Freemasonry. So all of a sudden in Nauvoo, there's more Masons in this one little area where there's Latter-day Saint settlements than in the rest of the state. And Masons, at least in the United States, did operate on a democratic basis. So anytime one group of like-minded individuals starts to gain favor in a democracy, the rest, the minorities, all get nervous, essentially.
Yeah.
And that does happen with Freemasons. So at first, the Masons openly embraced us. Yeah, come in, we'll be part of it. But when too many men started joining, it seemed like the power was going to get out of balance. And the Freemasons all turned against us, eventually revoked the Masonic fraternity. But I mean, even after the church came to Utah, Brigham Young tried to invite a Freemason lodge to set up in Salt Lake. And some of the non-Latter-day Saints that were here beat him to it. Like, they were like, if we don't organize, if they organize a lodge before us, the same thing that happened in Nauvoo will happen. Yeah. So we organize it first. And that makes Freemasonry kind of a hotbed of anti-Mormonism during the Utah period. But in Nauvoo, at least at first, very open, very friendly. Joseph Smith joins the fraternity. He's not the head of the Masonic fraternity in Nauvoo. I think Hiram was the Grand Master. Joseph Smith was elected to be the chaplain. But he's also influenced by it too. Like, Freemasonry is another one of those things that's really fascinating. And we don't know as much as we want to about its origins. Most Masonic records go back to about the 1300s in Scotland. And beyond that, I've had a Mason tell me, and I should clarify here, I am not a Mason.
I'm starting to sound.
Everyone's wondering.
I'm starting to sound like one, but I've never even attempted to join Freemasonry. I just like history, and Masons are in and out of American history all over the place. Essentially they don't know the origin of where it came from. Like, once you get past the 1300s and there's no documentation, it turns into sort of legendarium. And some Freemasons believe that it goes all the way back to Solomon's Temple, which some Freemason stories, and their ceremonies typically revolve around a story, go back to Solomon's Temple and its construction. Now, we can't prove any connections there. They're also supposed to be connected to the Knights Templar. Like, a lot of this is actually in National Treasure.
Yeah. I'm going to go rewatch it.
Yeah, but outside of that, we don't know exactly what their origins are. But you could see why it would appeal to members of the church, because members of the church have felt like they were outsiders for so long. Now, all of a sudden, there's a group that's embracing them. Freemasonry upholds this narrative that, we support each other, we help each other, we make each other better, that would also appeal to members of the church too. And I mean, on a basic level, Freemasonry has a lot of its stories tied back to the Bible. And so members of the church really like the Bible and really like those stories in particular too. So they would have been eager to join for a lot of reasons: social, political, survival. Like, they just saw Freemasonry as a way to maybe stave off another extermination order, or at least open lines of communication with other people so that they would know that the church didn't have ill intent, or that the church wasn't trying to take over. Problem was, people became suspicious of church members. And I mean, it's weird, because you can go to Nauvoo today and there's the cultural hall. That's what it's labeled on on Main Street in Nauvoo, but it's the Masonic hall. I mean, they used it for a ton of different things. So maybe cultural hall is the more appropriate title. It was like the police station, and they'd hold dances there and stuff. But then you drive downriver to Warsaw, where the mob came from that murdered Joseph Smith, and there's a Masonic lodge right on the main street there too.
Crazy.
And almost every little town. Like, I was walking through Park City a couple years ago, and there was a Masonic symbol above the gap.
Really?
Like, yeah. And I was like, what the heck is this? And I went home and looked it up, and well, that's where the Masonic Lodge in Park City used to be. Yeah. So yeah, they are in a lot of places, and they do make promises to assist each other, but I don't think there's anything, overtly sinister about them. They're a group like the Elks or the Kiwanis Club. Mm-hmm. They just have an older history and more esoteric ceremonies. But today, I mean, they do community service, and they hang out together. And when you spend time, I know a guy who's a Freemason. We made a video on Freemasonry, and I became friends with him. And now I hang out with him once or twice a semester, because he'll tour my students through the Salt Lake Masonic Temple. And when you get there, you can see that, it's a bunch of guys. And it doesn't seem like there's anything too sinister going on. So, I mean, it's another one of those things where the more you know, the less fear you kind of have. But
that seems to be the issue. People will throw that out. Joseph was a Mason.
Yeah.
Enough said.
Yeah.
Like, that's enough to discredit the entire restoration.
Yeah.
As if there's that presupposition that it's evil, it's demonic, it's satanic.
Yeah. And I wonder if, when they find out that George Washington was a Mason, or that Ben Franklin was a Mason.
Do you love America?
Yeah, like George Washington and Ben Franklin actually were in the same lodge together in Philadelphia. Like, do they also? I mean, I guess the two choices there are, oh my gosh, it goes higher up than we thought, right? Or you look at it, if you actually look at like the numbers and the way Freemasonry was spread out throughout the United States, you go, oh, this was a thing. This was like, being a fan of a sports team before there were national sports teams.
Right,
it's like a place where guys went to hang out and spend time with other guys. And my podcast partner, Scott Woodward, always refers to Freemasonry as Boy Scouts for grown-ups.
Yeah, that's sort of
you know those people that are like super duper scouters, and they wear the uniforms. And
I know a few of those guys.
Yeah, they love they were very strict about how you carried in the flag and etc. And they love the pageantry. Freemasonry reminds me of that. Like, they really like structure and ceremony. Yeah. And I think some people just like the social aspect of it. But I haven't seen anything so far that's convinced me like it's of the devil, because it's run democratically, and there does seem to be like a fair amount of infighting amongst them. It also seems like each lodge is fairly independent. so that they're not working together to overthrow the government. Or maybe they're just so good at it by now.
They're just putting on a front.
Yeah. I totally bought hook, line, and sinker into Freemason propaganda.
Do you have an affiliate code to join the Masonic Lodge?
Go to Freemasonry.com. I don't.
I was reading some statistics. This was a while ago. I don't recall them exactly, but there was a correlation between men spending time with other men and reduction in like anxiety, depression, suicidality, and increase in positive emotions. Guys just getting together is a good thing.
Yeah, it's a very positive thing that unfortunately sometimes when people are outside the circle, right, you just feel like you have to associate something negative with it, and that's a natural human impulse that happens all the time in a number of different settings. But once you go into it, you realize this isn't as sinister as I thought it was. These are guys that like to throw pancake breakfasts and dress in cool outfits and stuff like that.
That sounds pretty wicked to me.
Like we took our kids to I took a bunch of students to the Salt Lake Masonic Temple, and I guess some of these kids had read a ton on Freemasonry. And after we were done, one of them was like, "Can I see the armory?" And I was like, "There's an armory?"
Was there?
And we walk in, and there's all these swords, and
cool.
They're not like
They're
real
decorative.
Swords, but I mean, I was sitting there going, "This is such a guy thing." Like, honestly, this is like when I'm walking through the mall and they have a store that has Aragorn's sword from Lord of the Rings.
You gotta go
like,
in.
It's only $300, but it'd be so cool to have that.
You want to have to see what it.
It's really relatable once you start to see the outfits that they wear, the way that they dress up, and every Freemason I've met has been like super nice to me. But it's a guy thing, right? And maybe it's a healthy thing because, like I said, it created a third space that wasn't political and wasn't religious. In fact, Masons are forbidden from talking about religion and politics in mixed company, where you could just go and be a guy and not feel judged and sort of like, I don't know, maybe you sit there and complain about your farm or your wife or something like that, and you feel like, you got some brothers, right? Hopefully, I would hope that an Elders Quorum, would be like that. And I like hanging out with my Elders Quorum. Yeah, I guess they're my lodge.
They're your lodge. Yeah,
that's why I don't want to be a Freemason.
I got an
Elders Quorum. It'd be cool if we had swords, but
that's gonna say it's they help good men become better and the occasional sword fight. Yeah, it's like, what a place.
And in my Elders Quorum, hopefully we help good men become better. Mostly my Elders Quorum helps people move. It feels like that's what we do.
A lot of that.
But we go shooting sometimes too, and I got to imagine that the 19th century equivalent is, you get a bunch of cool swords and crossbows and stuff like that. Like, there's a little boy aspect to Masonry that's really charming, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I love that. To get to one of the critiques, so I actually never knew this, that the Saints invited the Masonic Lodge to Nauvoo
they did.
and seeking unity with their fellow citizens. I had no idea that's what brought the lodge to Nauvoo.
Yeah.
Now, a critique that individuals will give is that the Joseph Smith's membership at the lodge is right before you would know the timeline. 6 weeks, somewhat close in order in the timeline to him revealing the endowment and doing the first ceremonies there. And there's, of course, criticisms of borrowing or stealing or any of those things from the Masonic Lodge.
Yeah.
How would you approach those types of critiques?
I mean, those critiques rest on the assumption that the endowment was revealed wholly to Joseph Smith and has not been changed or altered since. And the last couple of years in the church has probably dispelled a lot of that, because since President Nilsson became the president of the church in 2018, there were a lot of changes to the endowment. And people kind of became comfortable with the idea of, we can change the endowment. There's a connection. There's no denying it. I'm comfortable with it. The first thing I should say is, if we're talking about what we do in the temple, there's 4 primary things, right? We do baptisms for the dead, and initiatories, endowments, and sealings. And 3 of those 4 have no connections to Masonry at all. Masons don't do baptisms. Masons don't do anything like the initiatory ordinance. Masons don't perform sealings. In fact, women couldn't be Masons during the time. But there are similarities to the endowment ceremony. And you're right that the timing is such that we can't deny that there probably was a connection. And I mean, you can look at certain things like Joseph Smith's discourses during the time, and it's clear that he's being influenced by the Masons. He's drawing from some of their language. Like, a connection that never gets brought up is he's made a Mason, and then the next day he meets and forms the Relief Society. And a lot of the language he uses in the Relief Society is kind of like him saying, this is supposed to be for women what Masonry is for men. Whoa. Like, he's bugged by the fact it seems like that Masons don't permit women in their lodge. Yeah. And he's thinking, it'd be cool if we had a sisterhood, that could meet together and provide relief. Relief actually is a big word that shows up in a lot of Masonic lore.
Interesting.
And so, would people lose their testimony if they thought the Relief Society was influenced by by the Masons? It seems like, not a big deal to me. But if you're assuming that the endowment was 100% like a revelation, the same way the sections of the Doctrine and Covenants were revealed, I could see how you could have problems with that. The actual historical evidence indicates that the endowment was something that Joseph Smith assembled and put together, and that went from his hands into the hands of Brigham Young and Wilford Woodruff and others, and they changed and altered it as they saw fit. And likewise, President Nelson. President Nelson, it's clear, wanted to emphasize the role of Jesus Christ in the endowment more, so they had this beautiful prologue. I can't talk about it at length, that just centers the entire ceremony on Jesus Christ. If you look at the endowment itself, it's pretty clear, once you know a little bit about Masonic ceremonies, that there are similarities, but there's also some huge differences.
Can we get into the similarities and differences?
Yeah, so what's the number one source for the endowment? The Bible, undoubtedly. The story that's told in the endowment is the creation, of the fall, of the atonement. There's no Masonic ceremony that tells anything like that. Masonic ceremonies can be about things like a murder at the construction of Solomon's Temple, to an adventure that happened in Scotland several hundred years ago. The endowment tells one unified story, and it's generally the story in the book of Genesis. When a person's getting ready to go to the temple, I usually say to them, hey, read Moses chapter 2 to 4, and you'll basically know the story that's going to be told there. And we've always been fairly transparent about that. Now, the ceremony and the signs could be that Joseph Smith adapted those from Masonry. So what I'm guessing is and I'm comfortable with the idea that Joseph Smith borrowed the pedagogy. And pedagogy just means the teaching methodology that Masons use. So I could see he becomes a Mason in March, and he's sitting there watching the Masonic ceremonies, which are sort of like a play that you act out, and the audience participates, and the initiate, if it's that kind of ceremony, does certain things and wears ceremonial clothing and stuff like that. I could see Joseph Smith looking at that and saying, this is a really good way to teach people. Like, this is more engaging than just lecturing them.
For sure.
And so he decides to adapt that to, instead of just telling them the story of the creation, fall, and atonement, let's act it out. Let's act it out, and let's let the people be characters, and let's introduce them as a figure in the story. I mean, I think we're pretty open that Adam and Eve in the endowment represent men and women generally, and so I think that's what Joseph Smith did. Now, I could be wrong. It's possible that the endowment was delivered, wholly by inspiration to Joseph Smith, and that the similarities are coincidences, or a popular theory at the time was that Masonry was a corrupted form of the endowment. But I think the Occam's razor simplest thing to say is just that Joseph Smith saw the way the Masons taught and said, this is a good way to package all these truths together in a meaningful way that will allow them to participate, to make it more meaningful, and allow them to make these key covenants. Because there's also those key covenants we make in the endowment that Masons don't make in their particular ceremonies. I mean, I guess you could really stretch and say that there's a connection between being charitable and living the law of consecration and stuff like that. But it seems like he's doing something different. The other thing I would say is, okay, if the temporal connection is Joseph becomes a Mason in March and then introduces the endowment in May, who did he introduce the endowment to? First 9 men that he endows all have one thing in common.
The 12?
Nope.
Well, I don't know.
They're Masons.
Oh,
they're all Masons.
They would understand.
Yeah, and none of them came running out of the red brick store saying, hey, Joseph ripped off everything from the Masons, right?
Interesting.
All of them seem to have no issue with what Joseph Smith was doing. And some of them, specifically Heber C. Kimball is the one later on that says, the Masonic ceremony must have been corrupted. But he doesn't, assert that as proof positive. And all of them seem to be okay with this sort of divine play that Joseph Smith is introducing that teaches them the principles of the gospel and introduces the plan of salvation and the basic covenants that a person's expected to make. So, I mean, honestly, Joseph Smith wanted every man in Nauvoo to be endowed, and almost every man in Nauvoo was a Mason. And what's one charge that they're not making? That Joseph stole it from Masons. That was made by Masons who weren't Latter-day Saints later on, who saw the similarities between the ceremonies and said he must have stolen this. But I mean, if we're doing like a pie chart breakdown, I would say probably 80% of the Masonic ceremony, 80% of the temple endowment comes from the Bible. And then there's probably some additional stuff from the Book of Mormon, because the Book of Mormon really alters our perception of the fall and introduces a number of things. And then I'd say probably like 10% is Masonic right. So there's a connection. Like, let's don't deny that there is. I don't think that really changes anything. What has to change is a person's perception of where the endowment comes from. And I could see people already, saying, well, why do you guys change the endowment if it's sacred, if it comes from God?
They'll say, didn't Joseph say that the ordinances are everlasting and cannot be changed?
Yeah.
Something to that effect.
Yeah, but I mean, okay, so it just parallel story. In the 1950s, we're building a temple in Switzerland. And the big problem is this is the first temple in Europe, and Europe just has a ton of different languages and nationalities. So you're going to have, I don't know, 26 different shifts of temple workers.
Yeah, different languages.
So you can present the endowment in French and in German and in Polish and in Italian and so on and so forth. Yeah. And that's a huge task, right? And the church is still relatively small in Europe. A guy named Gordon B. Hinckley comes in and says, why don't we make a movie? Let's just instead of acting out the play, which we've done in all the other temples, let's make a movie. And let's just dub the movie into different languages, and we'll use that to present the endowment. So Gordon B. Hinckley is borrowing the pedagogy. He's borrowing the teaching methodology that makes it easier to translate the endowment in different languages. How is that different? Joseph Smith basically did the same thing. I mean, for a long time, the creation in the endowment film was from the movie Fantasia.
Yeah.
So there's a short of Fantasia that shows like the creation of the earth, and they got permission from Disney to use that as part of the endowment film.
Was Walt Disney also a Mason? That would really connect.
I think he was, actually. I think Disney was a Mason.
It's all coming together.
It's all coming together, right? So, I mean, Gordon B. Hinckley basically said, here's a good way to teach people in a way that's engaging, that will allow us to do it in a number of different languages. I think Joseph Smith saw the Masonic ceremonies and said, here's a good way that's engaging, that we can teach people the sacred truths and covenants that they need to know. And I'm totally okay with that. And today, if tomorrow they came out and said, we've changed this portion of the endowment for this reason, I get it. I think that they have the keys necessary to do that. One source indicates that the endowment in Nauvoo took around 8 hours to perform.
My goodness.
Like they stopped and had a lunch in the middle. And today we've got it down to, 2 hours?
Sub 2
So
now,
obviously we've changed quite a bit, right?
Yeah.
And so members of the church should get comfortable with the idea that instead of the endowment being wholly, written down, dictated under the voice of inspiration, it's a way of assembling a set of vital truths together and teaching them to somebody and allowing them to participate in a covenantal process.
I think that's a big part of the issue. We don't believe in sola scriptura, which is that the Bible is the sole infallible source of faith. It's infallible. But sometimes as members, we think that our scriptures are completely infallible, or that the temple ceremonies are completely infallible or perfect the way that they are, which are just that's not how God works with us.
Yeah, people come in and say, you're changing stuff.
Yeah.
And I mean, they said that to Jesus, right?
Yeah.
What right do you have to give us this higher law, right? And Jesus is like, no, I wrote the law, guys. So I'm telling you, it's different than the way it's supposed to.
And I think members get uncomfortable with change because they think, well, if he was a prophet and that was revelation and inspiration, then why did that have to change down the road?
Yes. We get really comfortable with the idea the church is true. When a little kid bears their testimony, it's, I want to bear my testimony. I know the church is true. I love my mom and dad. But the words in scriptures are true and living. And a living thing changes and evolves, right? The fundamental principles of the endowment are exactly the same as they were in Nauvoo's. But the methodology, the way that we do it, I mean, we use more comfy fabric.
Thank goodness.
The
chairs are probably a lot more comfortable.
Yeah, the chairs are way more comfortable. In Nauvoo, all the garments were wool, and they came down to here and here.
They're just sweating it out for
grateful.
8 hours.
I'm so grateful that the members of the church were like, no, garments have to look this way, and they have to be made of this material, because oh my goodness, that's tough, right? So let's roll with the punches. Let's change with the times. Let's keep our fundamental core of what we are. But our church has always been innovative. Like, we took advantage of the printing press when we were publishing the Book of Mormon. We built a radio station. We broadcast General Conference. What if we were still saying, oh, you have to come to General Conference in person, or it doesn't count? No, let's set up a satellite. Let's broadcast it. Let's stream it over the internet. I remember when I was a missionary, you had to go to the chapel to watch General Conference over satellite feed. What if we were still doing that today? Today you turn on LDS.org and you sit down with your family and you watch it at home. It's so much better. So for some reason with sacred ceremonies, we just feel like everything should be locked in time and it never changes. As long as the fundamental principles are the same, I'm comfortable with change. Bring it on. Let's use water instead of wine, all that stuff.
Yeah, I think it's a principle. I think it was Uchtdorf who several years ago talked about the restoration is still rolling forth, is still unfolding.
It's still going on.
And I think we as humans, we crave for something to be unchanging. We want to cling to it. And I think sometimes we have a hard time grasping the reality that the only unchanging, reliable, infallible thing is God himself and Jesus Christ.
Yeah, that's the foundation, right? And that we expect to be unchanging. But I mean, if you're married to someone and you think they're not going to be a different person 20 years from now, and you're not growing. Growing is changing, right? Changing is growing. And so a living church has to change and embrace change and be a little bit different. We're not frozen in time.
Yeah, so well said. And I think it's actually a really good segue to the next topic that we wanted to chat with you about, which was the priesthood ban.
Okay.
So in a similar era, right, a few years later, and I think it may be a good way, you did such a good job at outlining the context of Freemasonry, and wonder if you'd be able to set the context, set the stage for this conversation of the priesthood ban.
Yeah, so the church the church is restored in the United States where slavery exists. And most people today don't appreciate how deep that divide is. Especially, they just don't do the work to kind of put themselves into the mindset of 19th century people. Where, I mean, not only was racism not something that was super on their mind. A lot of people believe slavery was wrong, but even someone really progressive like Abraham Lincoln would say that slavery was wrong, but he didn't think that the races should mix with each other. And so if you're going back to the 1830s, first of all, most church members come from the North, where slavery isn't legal, and there aren't a lot of people of African ancestry. But as the church expands and grows, they start converting people from the South who do own slaves. They have to confront those questions. Maybe the real thing that sort of put race right into a collision course with the church was that God asked them to build the city of Zion in Missouri, which is a slave state. I have a friend who wrote her dissertation on Missouri and said, I don't think there's a more difficult place in North America God could have asked them to build the city. So the church members come from the North, and I'll grant that they were probably a little bit naive, because they have the Book of Mormon, which not only teaches that all are like unto God, black and white, bond and free, it teaches that the Native Americans are descendants of the house of Israel. And no white settler likes the Native Americans. Like, they're dangerous. Get out of here. Independence was 6 miles away from unorganized Indian territory. And all of a sudden you got these guys showing up and saying, yeah, the Native Americans are our brothers and sisters. And they start teaching things like racial equality in a slave state. And it really sets people off. Like, the mob that kicks the church out of Jackson County, Missouri is overt. They issue a statement where they say, among other things, that church members were encouraging racial mixing, that they were inviting people of color and mulattoes, which was like a mixed race individual, to settle among them, and that was not okay with the Missourians. Whoa. So the church gets kicked out. And I mean, in part, after the church gets kicked out of Missouri, they're spending so much time trying to get their land back that they make statements where we're not interfering with slavery, okay? And we're not trying to mix the races together. And that swings us back the other direction. So we're trying to play nice with the Missourians so that we can actually build Zion and say, we're not trying to interfere with your way of life. God's asked us to build this city.
And this was all Joseph Smith at the time.
This is all Joseph Smith at the time. And the Missourians just wouldn't have it. And I mean, at the time, American politics ran a spectrum where there were people that were abolitionists, like W.W. Phelps is an abolitionist. He thinks that slavery is wrong and it should be ended. And he publishes the editorials in the church newspaper that get us in trouble in Missouri. There's people who own slaves in the church that come from the South. But most people are in this middle spectrum called just anti-slavery, where they think that slavery is wrong, but they're not willing to shed blood in order, they don't want violence or anything like that. Most church members kind of find themselves in this area. Joseph Smith probably leaned towards the abolition end of the spectrum, but not as extremely as W.W. Phelps did. So when they get to Nauvoo and they're no longer in a slave state, Joseph Smith and the First Presidency actually send out a letter saying, when we finish the Nauvoo Temple, people of every race will be able to mix it. So it seems like they don't have any kind of temple ban in mind. Joseph Smith runs for president in 1844, and he's the first major candidate to say we need to end slavery. Like, he actually says we need to end slavery by 1850. And he proposes a plan. I don't know if the plan would have worked. I don't know if there's any way to end slavery other than, 600,000 deaths in the Civil War. But at least he's proposing something. And also under Joseph Smith's leadership, at least 3 people of African ancestry are ordained to the priesthood. So it seems clear that there's no priesthood policy when Joseph Smith is around. And the weird thing is it seems like at first under Brigham Young, there wasn't either. Brigham Young, for instance, in the Council of 50 Minutes, which are recorded in about 1845, says, it really seems like it's environment. It's not skin color. A black member of the church meets with Brigham Young at winter quarters, and openly the black guy says, I know I can't hold the priesthood because I'm black. And Brigham Young says, race doesn't have anything to do with it. God is made of one blood, all people. So as late as 1847, it seems like Brigham Young doesn't have any priesthood ban in mind. But between 1847 and 1852, his views change. And it seems like what changed his views was the idea of intermarriage. So almost everyone in the United States who's of European ancestry during this time period is opposed to intermarriage. They think that mixing the races together is dangerous. And this goes on. I mean, there's some states that have laws on the books until the 1960s saying that interracial marriage is forbidden. And so that might have affected Brigham Young's view. The other thing is most people are surprised to hear that the announcement of the priesthood ban doesn't take place in general conference or through an official church epistle. It's at a legislative session. So Brigham Young is wearing a couple different hats. He's the president of the church, and he's the governor of Utah, and he's the superintendent of Indian Affairs.
That's a lot of hats.
And they're having a bunch of discussions about, well, Utah's entering, we want to try and become a state. And for every state that joined the United States during this time, the major question was, are you going to be a slave state or are you going to be a free state? Because both sides were trying to get more states on their side so that they could overturn slavery or so that they could make slavery permanent.
With voting,
To the point where during the time, every state had to sort of say, we'll be a slave state, we'll be a free state. And they instituted this thing called popular sovereignty, which was, they can just vote. And that turned into a bloodbath in Kansas because a bunch of pro-slavery and anti-slavery people come in and just start killing each other.
Starts trying to vote at the same time.
So I mean, I'm not saying Brigham Young was right all the time, but that's what he's dealing with. Is if Utah goes the popular sovereignty route, what's going to stop the same thing that happened in Kansas from happening here? If Utah comes in as a free state, the southern states will hate us. If Utah comes in as a slave state, the northern states will hate us. The other question was Indian slavery, like. Native Americans in the Intermountain West practiced slavery as well, and we were trying to reach out to them. And so I'm not saying Brigham Young was right, because he does say some things that are wrong. But his justification might be that he's doing the best he can to try and balance all these factions. And it seems like the major goal he has in his mind is to make Utah a state so that the Saints can choose their own leaders. As long as they're a United States territory, the federal government can appoint their leaders, basically. And they're allowed to hold some limited elections, but they're really kind of puppets on the string. Once they become a state, they're an independent polity. They can determine their own destiny. And so I think Brigham Young was playing a game there. At the same time, too, he gives this speech where he ties the priesthood ban to them being descendants of Cain. And, I mean, Brigham should have known better. You know, we believe people are punished for their own transgressions and not for the sins of their ancestors. But he was also teaching something that was very commonly taught about European Christians, which was that black people are descendants of Cain. Now, if you go and look at the scriptures, there's nothing there that actually says that. It doesn't say what the mark was on Cain. It doesn't even tie the mark to any kind of priesthood policy or ban. And so, I mean, I think the church has gone so far as to say that explanations justifying the ban were wrong. So in that sense, we could say Brigham was wrong in the way that he explained it. But do we fully know what his motives were behind instituting the priesthood ban? We don't know. And to be honest with you, throughout Brigham's life, the ban was really unevenly applied.
Wasn't it specifically a ban on just like African descent from a specific area of?
Yeah, because I mean, like if you're an Egyptian, we never had any kind of priesthood ban.
So it wasn't necessarily. So it wasn't a race thing or a skin color thing. It was like a geographic.
I would say it was a skin color thing.
It was.
Yeah, it was dark-skinned Africans. And it feels like it was fairly common. But like I said, it's so difficult for a 21st century person to just picture how big a deal race was in the 19th and the early 20th century. That like calling someone an Italian, was a slur, or saying that somebody was a Pole, that they were Polish, which just a white person. We're not hiring any Irish people. You can see signs like that out there. To where,
that's crazy.
I mean, today, thinking like, you'd slur somebody for being an Italian seems really strange to us. But in the 19th century, it was a big deal. The other thing is talking about the superiority of the white race today makes us super uncomfortable. But why is that?
Germany.
The worst war ever fought in the history of the world.
Yeah.
We are post that war. But I mean, in the early 20th century, it wasn't weird to see someone like Teddy Roosevelt give a speech where he would say, the Teutonic race, meaning the Germans, are destined to rule and civilize the world. Today,
kidding.
If somebody gives a speech like that, we're like, oh,
Teddy said that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Holy
Yeah. World War II just caused us to immediately say, oh my gosh, this is the end result.
Yeah, to see where the ideology leads.
Yeah, we see where this leads when we base our perceptions of people solely on their race and how dangerous that can be. And so post-World War II, we integrate the armed forces. And that really is the thing in America that starts the ball rolling. Up to then, it was super common for there to be a white church and a black church. For people of different races to not worship together, for intermarriage to be against the law. But the integration of the armed forces and the shock that comes when we learn what Hitler's Germany actually did causes everybody to start to examine their perceptions of race and say, okay, this is a road we don't want to go down any longer. The church, unfortunately, is not immune from these effects. Members of the church already felt like they were othered because of their religious beliefs and because of plural marriage. And it seems like race was one area where, they were willing to go with the flow, essentially. And that might be one of the toughest things for a Latter-day Saint to grapple with, is not that some of our leaders held racist views. I mean, almost everybody. Abraham Lincoln has been called a racist because of some of his writings. But that the members of the church, by and large, just didn't oppose it very much. Like the main voice opposing the priesthood policy is Orson Pratt. But Orson Pratt is opposing it because he's saying, hey, eventually we're going to have to do missionary work in Africa. If this policy is in place, what are we going to do? And later on, he comes up with a different justification, which is that they must have done something in pre-mortality. That, saying a person's a descendant of somebody else doesn't justify discrimination. So they must have done something in pre-mortality, and that's why they were born into these types of bodies. That's why there's races, is essentially what he comes up with. So it's a shame, but it's a communal crime. It's something that most Latter-day Saints of the 19th century wouldn't have had a problem with, and most Americans until the mid-20th century wouldn't have had a problem with. And then the civil rights movement happens, and people start to, have their perceptions changed. The church is a conservative organization, and I'm not using that in the Republican Democrat kind of way.
Sure.
Conservative in the sense that the church generally, like I mentioned, has been willing to embrace change, but a lot of times we'll look at societal change and say, is this a positive thing? Like, do we need to go along with this? But eventually the church starts to realize that this is problematic. And as we expand to become a worldwide church, it's a problem there too. So questions are being raised that hadn't been raised with previous church generations, where we were sort of insular and in the Intermountain West. Now, you got a thing like a mission president in Fiji says, well, the people here look exactly like people of Black African ancestry, but they're not. They don't come from Africa. I've been to Fiji, and people there look like they're of Black African ancestry, but they're not. So does this apply? Is it about appearance, or is it about ancestry? And church leaders start to genuinely wrestle with those questions. And now we run into the problem of legacy. Like, if we change this policy, are we disrespecting the legacy of Brigham Young or Joseph F. Smith, who sort of codified the priesthood policy? But it was also clear that the policy just wasn't going to be workable. And so church leaders start to wrestle with it. Some church leaders choose to defend it, some more vigorously than others. Some church leaders are working to try and change the policy, and some church leaders are working to find a safe space for people of African ancestry in the church without changing policies. But the major thing is they felt like they couldn't change the policy because it had been ensconced in the church for so long without some kind of revelation. So we have records of the leaders of the church holding discussions and saying, why don't we just change the policy? Like one proposal in the 1960s was, why don't we just give Black people the Aaronic priesthood? Then we could do missionary work in Africa, and they could at least pass the sacrament and baptize. And David O. McKay apparently just said, I think we can just change this. And he was open and saying, I haven't gotten a revelation, but I think we can just change it. Hugh B. Brown kind of said the same things. There were other more conservative members of church leadership that said, this is such a big deal, we don't think we should change it without a revelation. And so those historical forces kind of come together to where Spencer W. Kimball is the main guy. And you see this again and again in the church, but there's a major question. Leadership is divided on it. One person comes in and starts to build consensus. So they start to do just the genuine day-to-day work of sitting down with somebody and telling me, hey, how do you feel? Like, what do you think is driving this? And would you feel comfortable if we did change it? And President Kimball is a master at this. Like, the book that his son wrote on him, it just shows, if you want to carry out positive change in the church, here's how you do it. Because he went to somebody like Bruce R. McConkie, who had defended the policy, and said, Bruce, can you do me a favor? Will you read the scriptures and just see if there's any theological justification for this? And Elder McConkie comes back and says, there's not a lot. We've got tradition, and that might be enough for us, but in the scriptures, there's not a lot. He asks Thomas S. Monson, Boyd K. Packer to all read the scriptures. He holds conversations with the 12. And then finally in 1978, he gathers the 12 together and says, I'll be honest, I want this to change, but I don't want it to change because I want it to change. I want to seek the Lord's will. And once they're all united and they pray, boom, it changes. So, sometimes the struggle is consensus. Like, can we make a change this big if we're not united in doing it? And they do work to build unity. Like, a lot of people will bring up, well, there were 2 members of the Quorum of the 12 that weren't in that meeting. Well, Delbert Stapley was in the hospital. Not a lot we can do about that. Marky Peterson was in Ecuador, which Elder Peterson was a very ardent defender of the policy. But before they announced the policy, they went to the hospital. All members of the First Presidency sat down with Elder Stapley and said, we got this revelation. Will you support it? Yes. They call Marky Peterson and say, we got this revelation. He says, I'll support it. They've achieved consensus. They move forward. So, that to me is the harder question. Not if you understand the racial context of the Restoration, it seems like a priesthood policy isn't all that surprising. What's the tougher question is, why did it go on for so long? Like, why didn't God intervene sooner? I don't have a great answer for that, except to say that he intervened when the leaders of the church were united and were committed to carrying this out, so that there's no person that's like, well, I'm going to go off and start my own church because I don't believe in this. Everybody was united, and so when the change was implemented, we were ready for it. And I mean, it's been almost 50 years now, but we still have some work to do, especially when it comes to racism within the church. Like, we're not perfect, but I can tell you right now that racism is an almost universal sin that almost every group on earth struggles with. And in my travels, racism in the United States exists. It does. If we're saying it doesn't, we're closing our eyes. But does it exist other places? Yeah. And a lot of places it exists with no guilt and no shame and no second guessing of whether or not it's okay. One of the great things about the United States, and I'll add the church here too, is that at least there was second guessing. There were people saying, is this right? Should we feel guilty about this? And today, the leaders of the church, specifically President Nelson and President Oaks, have asked us to not just be nice people and not be racist, but to lead out in ending racism. And a big part of ending racism is to understand its history, to understand where it comes from, and to do what we can to try and change the systems that enabled it for so long. So we got to be in the fight on this one. This is one where we can't just be passive. We've got to be looking at the world around us and saying, what can I do to solve this problem? Because it's a big obstacle. The road to Zion. Racism is like the master level final boss that we have to overcome. And we've made progress, but we've still got a ways to go. No doubt in my mind.
The criticism that's often levied with the priesthood ban is that, I don't remember who made this statement, but the prophet of the church cannot lead the church astray, right?
Yeah.
And then I'll point to the priesthood ban and say, well, what about that?
Yeah.
Isn't that, weren't you guys led astray and you just went along with it? How could that be prophetic?
Yeah. And I mean, the church has openly said that the explanations given for the priesthood ban are wrong. And we disavow them, right? But gosh, there's a lot of, what does it mean to be led astray? And what does that look like? And does God sometimes purposely take us on journeys? I mean, I would say that the members of the church, I hope today, are more attuned to the racism and the injustice and inequality than the average person is. And maybe it's because of the experience we had, I would hope that if there's been racism in our past, that we're like the anti-Nephi Lehis, where we don't just recognize that what happened was wrong. We bury our weapons and we strive to fight against it. And so, what does it mean for the prophet to lead the church astray? I don't know exactly what that means. And do prophets make mistakes? We've always believed that. Like the first real section of the Doctrine and Covenants, the earliest revelation, which is section 3, is Joseph Smith making not just a mistake, but a huge mistake. He lost the manuscript of the Book of Mormon. Was that leading the church astray? Well, there wasn't really a church, so maybe that's a little loophole you can get out of it. But, I mean, church leaders made mistakes. I don't think that leading them astray is the same thing. Does that make sense? And like I said, did they lead the church astray, or was the church already in this toxic environment that I would hope the prophets led us out of, which they did eventually. But for a while, I don't know, It's such a complicated question that it's difficult to answer exactly what that means.
Yeah, I've heard it. This might have been True Millennial. I don't recall where I saw it. It looked like a member of the 70 was giving a talk, and he just had this analogy of the church is like an airplane, and God is the control tower.
Yeah.
And the prophet's the pilot. And the control tower gives the pilot a lot of leeway on how to move and navigate the airstreams and the elevation. But the control tower makes sure that it arrives at its destination.
Yeah.
It's like the church will arrive at its destination, but the prophets are given the controls to really navigate the ship a lot.
Yeah, and I mean, I think sometimes God lets us make mistakes. Like the example I always come back to is in the Old Testament. The Israelites want a king, and they've been told that it's wrong.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we don't care.
Nothing good is going to come out of this, and they're still like, we still want a king.
Yeah.
And so the Lord tells Samuel, like, they haven't rejected you, they've rejected me. Go get him a king. And it causes nothing but problems for the next couple hundred years. But the Lord says, if that's the journey you want to go on, I'm going to let you go on that journey. I would say the saints in the 19th century were good people, but they lived in a society where racism was just so prevalent that they got caught up in it too. And in some ways, they may have tried to overcompensate. Like, we're so weird in so many ways. Here's one way we can be normal. That they went on a journey as well. And we suffered, and we still suffer because of it. Abraham Lincoln was pretty biblical when he gave his second inaugural address and said it might require an effusion of blood to cleanse us from this sin, which he was talking about slavery. I would say in the church, we still have some reckoning to do. And what I tell my students, because, I mean, you guys have never lived in a church where there was a priesthood ban, right? Neither have I, to be honest with you. Like, the priesthood policy was changed a couple weeks before I was born. What I tell my classes is you didn't make the mess, but will you help clean it up? Like, help us fix this, okay? And maybe in cleaning it up, we'll learn a little bit about how we can clean up other problems and how we can help people along the way. So I don't think young members of the church should feel any guilt or feel any charge to be they're racist or anything like that. I don't think our theology is racist. I think that the priesthood policy was maybe a wrong turn that we took, and now we're getting back onto the right path. And I hope that, moving forward, like I said, we're like the anti-Nephi Lehis, that we not only recognize what happened, we do all we can to actively not allow it to happen again. So, again, it's probably the most complicated historical puzzle me and my students have to sort of tackle together, because we're not at the end of that road yet.
That's why we figured we'd ask you.
Yeah. And boy, if I had the one sentence that solves racism,
give us the Instagram.
Yeah. There's not a one magic line 30-second soundbite that solves racism in the church, because racism is such a ubiquitous sin. It's just present almost everywhere. I lead tours to Israel, and I love those people over there. Like, they are such good people. Is there racism there? Yeah. I've never visited a country where there wasn't some form of racism. It just seems to be universal that human beings look at someone that looks different from them and immediately become suspicious or see themselves as better in some way, shape, or form. And it's just something that we've got to get past. I think we've got the tools to do it. But say, for example, someone comes up to you and says, the Book of Mormon is racist. I would say the Book of Mormon engages with the question of racism. In fact, it presents racism as a very serious sin. And maybe even the sin that destroyed the civilization that the Book of Mormon describes. Yeah. It doesn't present it as a positive thing. It presents it as something that just caused blood feud after blood feud after blood feud. But it goes back to what we all believe and know, is that we all came from a common ancestor. The Book of Mormon peoples all came from Lehi, but because their appearance is different, they murder and they slaughter and they discriminate against each other. We all come from a common ancestor, but because we look different, because of the twists and turns and different journeys, we have this impulse to discriminate against someone. It's just a universal sin that has to be overcome. And the only tool I can see that's been really effective is teaching people the gospel of Jesus Christ and making sure they know that every human being is a child of God. And even if they look different from you or act different from you or come from a different place or have different beliefs than you, they all deserve respect. And that respect starts with recognizing them as God's child and your brother and sister, in spite of all the differences that we see.
Well, Casey, Christian, I think that might be the exact spot for us to stop. Okay. That was a perfect conclusion.
Yeah, I've gone on and on. So.
Oh, no, I can't express enough of my gratitude. I love the way that you express challenging topics with openness and sincerity, and with the willingness to say, like, we don't have all the answers. I think that's okay. I think part of it is engaging in the wrestle openly and authentically, and we're still seeking more and more light and truth every day.
Yeah, all of us, right?
So, Casey, if people can't get enough of you, how do they get more?
So I we have a podcast called Church History Matters. If you want to talk about race in the priesthood, we've done 6-hour-long episodes. If you want to talk about polygamy, if you want to talk about Joseph Smith's martyrdom, this year we did Come Follow Me in 2025. So we went through the Doctrine and Covenants. And so if you want deep dives in the Doctrine and Covenants, but this year we're going back to doing series. And so in 2026, our first series is going to be Science and Religion.
Awesome.
Can they be reconciled? I think another series we have planned is Women in the Priesthood.
That's a fun one.
That one's making us nervous because we don't want to mansplain the question. But we figured it's a huge issue. We need to talk about it. Sexism is another challenge we've got to overcome. Word of Wisdom. We've just outlined so many series. And part of the reason why we went back to series instead of doing Come Follow Me is we'd have people come up to us all the time and say, I want you to do a deep dive into the King Follett discourse, or can you talk a little bit more about church finance? Or one guy was like, could you do the scouting program? Like, we'll put a pin in that one. But me and my partner Scott Woodward just love this stuff, and again, it's edifying. I wouldn't have thought that doing a 6-hour discussion of race in the priesthood would be edifying, but it was. I came out at the end of that discussion saying, oh my gosh, I know so much more about this, and I feel so much more empowered to engage on the question. I know I was a little nervous the first time I visited a Masonic temple, but now that I've been there and I've explored it a little bit, I feel more empowered to say, hey, this is what is real and this is what's not real. I mean, we really just believe in the Savior's teaching that the truth will make you free. And so let's seek out truth and let's find it, and let's don't be embarrassed about it. Sometimes it's difficult, but truth does set you free. Jesus was correct when he said that.
Yeah. So Casey and his counterpart on their podcast do an excellent job of that, of shining a light on the darkness and facing that and coming out with a stronger faith for us. So go check them out. Church History Matters podcast.
Yeah, and we do another series called Restoration Revealed. That's not every week. We're going to try and make it every month. But that's where we go to a church history site. So
I have
very
seen
cool.
Yeah, we go to Carthage Jail and crawl around in the jail. And this year we're planning on doing stuff on Mountain Meadows and the handcart rescue. And depending on what our budget is, we're going to try and do one international trip. And
cool.
Do the church behind the Iron Curtain and stuff. If I get to go, we'll see.
So if you've ever dreamed of watching Casey crawl around a dirty jail, go check out that podcast.
Super fun. We have a blast, honestly.
I believe it.
I have a charmed life. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us. And
thank you so much.
Come join the rebellion.
Thanks for joining this episode of The Holy Rebellion. We'll see you next week.